Okay, so I'll start off just by introducing Adriana. So Adriana Vergés is an associate professor and she leads a group within the Centre of Marine Science and Innovation at the University of New South Wales. Her research focuses on the ecological impacts of climate change and the conservation of the world's algae forests and seagrass meadows, which are increasingly under threat. She has worked in temperate ecosystems and tropical coral reefs from around the world, and much of her research is experimental. So Adriana, I'd like to throw it across to you and you can tell us all of your interesting research tonight.
It's a great pleasure to be talking to the Mid-Coast Council today via Zoom. I'm going to now share my screen and show you a PowerPoint. Right, so my name is Adriana Vergés and I'm based at UNSW Sydney and the Sydney Institute of Marine Science. And the work that I'm going to be talking to you about today is two restoration projects that we have been working on, a big team of us have been working on for the last 10 years or so. And it includes a very strong community engagement component. So I'll be talking a little bit about that. The two projects are called Operation Crayweed and Operation Posidonia. And the way that I'll run this is that I'll first talk about Operation Crayweed and then we'll have some time for questions, and then I'll switch over to Operation Posidonia. And that way, hopefully we make this a bit more dynamic. There's less of me talking and you listening, and we make it more, interactive. So the research that I will be presenting was done on the lands of and the waters of the Darawal, Gadigal, Pichigal, Darkinjung, and Worimi people. And I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So let me start by asking you to imagine losing a forest along 70 kilometers of coastline on land. Imagine this happening right next to Australia's most populated city. Something kind of slightly similar happened to Sydney, where I live, not so long ago, and there were huge protests. And that's what you would expect to see if we lost 70 kilometers of a forest. However, when that kind of loss happens on the water, it often just goes out of sight, out of mind. And this is the story of the loss of a very important seaweed species called crayweed. The Latin name is Phylospora comosa. So this species makes beautiful, lush underwater forests. Crayweed is distributed along the whole of the east coast of Australia, around to Victoria, around Tasmania. And it went missing along these 70 kilometers of coastline right next to Australia's biggest city, Sydney. And nobody even noticed for decades until Melinda Coleman and Brendan Kelleher and some colleagues first wrote about it. Now, we don't know why crayweed disappeared, basically because we can't go back in time, but we think it's very strongly linked to the sewage problems that were happening in Sydney at the time. So back before the 1990s, sewage used to be discharged right on the coastline, and that meant that the water quality was awful. So places like Bondi Beach used to be closed for swimming 80% of the time because of this sewage problem. But this problem with the water quality was fixed in the 1990s with the installation of deep water ocean outfalls. Now, what happens now is that the sewage is better treated and it's discharged in deep pipes that are 2 to 4 kilometers long, and they discharge the sewage, in deep waters, which means that the sewage is immediately diluted in the water column, so it has a lot less impact. So the water quality now is actually amazing, considering the amount of people that live in Sydney. Our colleagues Mel Coleman, Brendan Kelleher, Peter Steinberg and others realized that crayweed had gone missing. Around 2010, we started thinking, should we bring it back? Should we try and restore this species? But before we launched into doing this, we asked ourselves, well, are we sure that it plays a unique role in the ecosystem, or could it be that crayweed actually plays a very similar ecological role to other seaweeds in the system which did return to the Sydney coastline by themselves? So the first study that we did as part of this project was to do some surveys to look at the biodiversity of these two species and other dominant species in the area. And to cut a long story short, I'll tell you that Crayweed does support very unique biodiversity. And in particular, it supports very high numbers of two species that are commercially incredibly important, the rock lobster and abalone. They're the two most valuable fisheries in the whole of Australia. Crayweed also supports tiny, we call it epifauna, that are unique. The composition of this epifauna is actually different to the little creatures that you find in other seaweeds. So yes, Crayweed is unique. So then we thought, okay, well, let's try and restore it. This is just a graph to show you, because I'm a scientist, with numbers, that indeed Crayweed, which is this one here, has a lot more abalone than other seaweeds in the same site. And this is a study that we did in 2 sites. Okay, so we know that it's unique and it's special. Now, can we restore it? Is the water quality now good enough for Crayweed to survive? That's the first question that we had. And here's my colleague, Ziggy Marzinelli. The way we do it when we restore it is that we take the Crayweed from nearby places, north of Palm Beach, south of Cronulla, and we attach it to mats that we deploy in the seafloor with this cable tie system. And this is what a restored Crayweed patch looks like. So this is the first site that we did, first in Long Bay and in Little Bay in Sydney. And again, some graphs just to demonstrate I'm a scientist. This basically is just to show you that the survival of the Crayweed in 2 experiments that we did with Crayweed from different places, either from Palm Beach, from Cronulla, it survived incredibly well. It survived as well as plants that we hadn't touched from nearby forests and other experimental treatments that we tried, that we did. But the most exciting thing about this project is that about 6 months after the restoration, we start seeing natural recruits of Crayweed. So this is a Crayweed that was transplanted. The process of transplanting it is stressful enough because we need to take the seaweed out of the site, it gets dried up a little bit, then we put it back again. And this process is so stressful that the first thing that the plants do when they are in their new habitat is they release their reproductive gametes, kind of going, okay, we may die here, this is very stressful, before we die, let's try and reproduce. And of course, after reproduction, you have babies, and we call them craybees, and this is what they look like. And they start appearing about 6 to 9 months after the transplant. And this is the beginning of the self-sustaining population. So this is not attached to any mat, this is not artificial at all. These are now plants that are growing again in sites where they used to be, but where they had disappeared for more than 20 years. So this is just a graph that shows how much Crayweed has expanded after our initial restoration efforts. So this is Long Bay, the northern side of Long Bay, and this is where we planted our first mats. And basically, once the plants survive, these craybees start growing up, they start having babies of their own, and then the seaweed starts reproducing and kind of expanding by itself without any assistance from us. So it's self-propagation, hundreds of meters away from the initial site, and this is the beginning of a new population. Now, another key question for us was like, well, when we do the Crayweed restoration, are we just bringing back the seaweed, or actually are we managing to bring back the little creatures that associate with it? This is a scientific graph where each point is essentially symbolizing an ecological community of one seaweed plant. All I want you to get from this is that these ones here are the ones that are restored Crayweed. The closer the points, the more similar they are. And what we can see is that they're starting to resemble the reference populations of Crayweed, which is a great thing. And they are different to other seaweeds in the system. So we are contributing to new biodiversity, if you like. At this point in this kind of big project, what we knew was that Sydney water quality was now good enough for both the babies and the adults, that our restoration methods work, and that we can bring Crayweed back, and its associated biodiversity. So the next thing that we wanted to do was to scale up this project. We had the proof of concept. Something else that we wanted to do, and we talked about this from the very beginning of the project, when we were dreaming about, are we going to be successful? Is this going to work? from the very beginning, we said, if this works, we really need to make a concerted effort to tell the world about it, to communicate, because this would be a rare good news story that deserves to be heard. And I think, especially in marine environments, we hear a lot about the many environmental problems that we face, and there are many. We hear a lot about the losses of entire ecosystems. And that is true, it's happening, and there's a lot of big problems that we need to fix. But we felt that we often don't hear about the problems that get solved, and they're the ones that can really inspire people and promote more conservation. So we wanted to make sure that if it worked, we would tell the world about it. So that's how the project, the kind of brand, if you like, Operation Crayweed was born. So we got a lot of friends together. They helped us, draw this logo. They helped us come up with a name. We created a website and a Facebook site, an Instagram account, Twitter, you name it, social media. And with this, we wanted to really kind of tell the story of what we were achieving in Sydney, and also to try and get some money to scale up the restoration. And so we did a crowdfunding campaign. It was just before Christmas, and we were asking people to give an underwater tree for Christmas. And it became a really kind of big kind of news story. The day we launched the project, we were on the news in the ABC, in Channel 9. We ended up making it to the BBC and beyond. And every time we were on the news and people learned about the project, they'd go online, they'd help us, by either giving $20 for one underwater tree, or $50 for a family, $500 for a patch. And in this way, we actually managed to raise $40,000, which helped us start to scale up. And then subsequently, we've obtained a number of grants from the federal government and the state government that is allowing us to keep growing and keep restoring Crayweed. But another way that we have put a lot of emphasis on is to try and reach out a bigger audience, a greater audience. We've been collaborating with artists, and in particular, we've been collaborating with Jennifer Turpin, Michaeli Crawford, and Christian Statham from Studio TCS. And they've been helping us to communicate our story, but through the medium of art. So one example of one of the projects that we've been working together with them on was a Sculptures by the Sea exhibition that happened in 2016, where the artists, they were actually invited to participate in the exhibition. They heard about our project through the crowdfunding campaign, etc. And they approached us to see whether we'd be interested in doing like an art meets science collaboration, where we would do the restoration of Crayweed here, which is in South Bondi. And their artwork would be making an artwork site fence that would try to bring attention to what was happening underwater, kind of make what was happening underwater visible to the world above. So they created this kind of fence around with kind of maritime elements. We also did a whole lot of workshops with school children. In particular, we worked with 100 schools from around the Bondi area, primary schools and some secondary schools. And what we did is we brought the kids to see the Crayweed restoration site. And then we brought Crayweed to their lab. Here it is here. And then we showed them the little creatures that live in and amongst the Crayweed. And then they made wearable art costumes in the shape of those creatures, which they then paraded as part of the exhibition. And there was even some music. It ended up being a beautifully kind of big event. This was the launch, for example, in Bondi Beach. And they sang We All Live in a Yellow Crayweed, which was really exciting. This is another art meets science project that we created. This was part of the Ocean Lovers Festival, where we printed a giant crayweed that was placed on the floor of this swimming pool here, these icebergs in Bondi. And then we had an underwater crayweed forest that was also in the pool, and that people could visit and snorkel, in a safe environment. And we did this in association with our colleagues from the Living Seawalls team as well. And then essentially, as we go to new sites, we try and get funds to do new art meets science collaborations that allow us to connect with the local communities. So this is an activity that we did when we planted in Manly, where we connected with children from Balgala North Public Schools, and the kids actually building on the artwork and the costumes of the first kind of group of children, they made an animated film about the story of Crayweed and the restoration. And this was launched by Sally Stegel in November last year. So where are we at with this now? So at the moment we have 6 sites where we have self-sustaining kind of forests that are growing. We have 6 sites where we're still working at trying to improve the method, or something's not quite working, so it's still work in progress. And then this year we got funding to do another 3 sites. So the project is still growing. The dream here is to bring Crayweed back to the entire metropolitan coastline. So we still have a lot of work to do. Just to finish up about this project, just to mention that there are other things that we're doing as well as just restoring. So for example, this is the work led by PhD student Georgina Wood, who's just finished her PhD, and a lot of her work involved looking at the genetics. So this is a complex graph. All I want you to take from this is that we're measuring the genetic makeup of Crayweed. We're measuring it in natural populations north and south of Sydney, and what we're trying to do is simulate the genetic diversity structure from nearby places. And these little circles here show the genetic structure of the little Crayweeds. And basically we are being successful at simulating the genetic structure of the nearby populations. And then just to finish up, and I'll take questions after this, I just wanted to introduce to you the people that Operation Crayweed is. There's actually one person missing here, but yeah, so this is work that Ziggy Marzinelli from Sydney University, Alex Campbell, University of the Sunshine Coast now, used to be UNSW, Peter Steinberg, Director of SIMS and Professor at UNSW, Melinda Coleman from New South Wales DPI, Brendan Kelleher from Southern Cross University. This was the original team. And then as we started growing, we brought students and research assistants with us, Georgina Wood and Lana Cashley, PhD students, Derek Cruz and Maddie Langley, research assistants, and Damon Bolton, who's also helping us on and off throughout the project. And the person missing here is a new student, Clayton Mead. And before I go into the next project, I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have. I'll stop sharing.
Okay, thanks, Adriana. This sounds like an amazing project, and particularly the community engagement part of this. It sounds like you really got a lot of buy-in from the community. Is that something that you think changed the nature of the project? Would it have been as successful without the community engagement? How did that help or hinder the actual project?
Yeah, I mean, I think involving the community is incredibly important, and there's actually a lot of studies that show that restoration is a lot more successful when local communities get involved, because they start kind of taking ownership of their area. And for example, in the place that the latest restoration site that is Manly, like we often get photographs from swimmers, divers, people that know the project, they swim over it. Whenever they see any interesting kind of wildlife interaction, they send us a photo, and that's really useful for us to know. One of the biggest problems that we have with Crayweed is that sometimes our transplants get overgrazed, either by urchins or by fish. So local communities can let us know about that, and then we can do a bit of a top-up to replace any plants that have been lost. So I think that's really, really helpful. But also, it's about it's about people kind of becoming stewards of their local kind of coastal patch. So if people know what's underwater, and if they start kind of learning about the different species and what they do, they're more likely to be supportive of conservation projects, and this kind of filters through. So I think a lot of the funding that we have got is partly because, like if a funding organization sees that everyday mom and dad people put in their own money to try and bring this Crayweed forest back, I think that the government's going to go, well, yes, this is something that people care about, so we're going to support it. So I think it's all connected.
Awesome. Okay, so we have a couple of questions here now. You talked about adjusting the techniques to make the growth more successful. What are some examples of these?
So there's a lot of kind of nitty gritty things that we kind of keep touching up on. And this is basically from, you know, how we drill, how many holes, how many, you know, this and that. So there's that practical side of things. There's also the genetics. So that's something that is new. So, you know, we basically mix populations from the north, from the south in a very deliberate way to try and have this outcome of having, you know, genetic structure that was similar to the natural populations. We have tried other things that haven't worked. So we tried a bag system that, you know, with the storms, it just got destroyed. We've tried a lot of biodegradable materials. So obviously we don't want to put plastic into the environment. So instead of the plastic mats, we tried coconut fiber. We tried lots of things and nothing worked. So at the moment, we're still using plastic, but then we just remove it after the population has taken off on its own. But yes, so this kind of trial and error is constantly kind of going on as we plant new sites.
Awesome. Next question. How well do the restored communities look to fare in the warming and acidified waters of the coming decades? To what extent will they be cooling influences in the local ecosystem?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So Georgina Wood's work, besides looking at the genetic kind of structure, she's also done like the first steps to try and see, is there any evidence that some populations are more warm adapted than others? So at the moment, Crayweed, you find it all the way to Port Macquarie. So if that's the warm edge of the population, you know, there's still quite a distance between Port Macquarie and Sydney. So that's kind of our buffer, you know. So for the Sydney populations to be affected by warming waters, it needs to get warmer than it is in Port Macquarie today. However, if the Port Macquarie are already a little bit warm adapted, something we're considering is, could we use some of those individuals to restore the populations in Sydney to prep them for the warmer waters that are ahead? And that's research that is ongoing. It's pretty blue sky. It's a little bit like what they're doing in coral reefs, trying to create like super corals, you know, that are able to sustain warmer temperatures. So that is something that we are interested in and that we're starting to do some work on. But I will also say, like, obviously with regards to climate change, yes, we can do a few things to try and warm adapt our populations, but the most important thing in terms of management and conservation that we need to do is reduce our CO2 emissions, of course.
So you mentioned Port Macquarie. We've actually had a few different people ask about what the population of crayweed is like off the mid-coast and how's that faring in this area.
Well, it's beautiful. I mean, it's really quite lush, and it's quite interesting how north of Sydney and the whole of the New South Wales coastline, crayweed really thrives on the kind of just below the intertidal, and that's where you find the really thick forest. But then as in Tasmania, you actually find it in really deep waters. Some of the most spectacular populations I've seen are in Montague Island, just off kind of near Batemans Bay. So yeah, they are really lush north and south of Sydney.
Okay, awesome. Just on the second half of that question, somebody had also asked, do you think that the bushfires and runoff from the bushfires could have potentially harmed the populations locally?
We haven't observed that. We were a bit nervous. You know, there was the fires and then it was really dry. And then you may remember there was that big storm, and that's when everything got flushed. And then the visibility was awful for quite a while. So the first time that we went diving after that, we were nervous going, oh my God, but everything was still there. We haven't detected any mortality due to this. I will say though that crayweed lives in wave-exposed, open kind of coastal areas, so it doesn't exist in estuaries. So you know, it's a more kind of flushed environment.
Okay, excellent. I think that's it for the moment. If we didn't answer your question, I'll have a look. We had some extra ones there, and we will be able to get back to you via email. But in the meantime, we'll move on to the second half of the presentation.
The other project that I want to talk about today is called Operation Posidonia, and it's also about restoration, but this time instead of restoring a seaweed, we're restoring a seagrass. And we like to think of seagrasses as kind of like the dolphins amongst the plants. So if you think about, like, you know, all life originally, you know, came from the sea, you know, seaweeds, some seaweeds started to colonize the land, and with time, these developed into flowering plants, completely adapted to life in terrestrial systems. And then some of these plants were actually able to recolonize the ocean. And this is what we now call seagrasses. So they're very different to seaweeds. They're actually a lot more kind of, seaweeds are a lot more simple, and they, you know, they're a lot more ancient in evolutionary terms. So it's a little bit like the story of the mammals that came from land mammals that recolonized the ocean and then adapted to live completely in the marine environment. So because they are flowering plants, they have flowers. This is what they look like. They also have roots and rhizomes and fruits. So they're a lot more complex than seaweeds. The species that we are restoring is called Posidonia australis, and this is what a meadow of Posidonia looks like. They're often monospecific, and they're often really, really extensive. And seagrass meadows, like the ones of Posidonia australis, are incredibly important in the ecosystem for many reasons. So they contribute to having better water quality because nutrients and sediments, etc., they settle and they kind of stick within the seagrass meadow. They protect shorelines from erosion. They're incredibly important blue carbon habitats. They can store more carbon, up to 30 times more carbon than terrestrial forests. They provide habitat for a lot of species, including some of, you know, the most beautiful kind of emblematic, you know, fish like the seahorses. They also have a lot of epifauna, just like Crayweed. And they're also very important nursery areas for prawns, for example, or for blue swimmer crabs, etc. And they provide, they support a lot of very important fishery species. Now, Posidonia australis is one of the dominant seagrass. It's the most complex of the seagrasses in Australia, and you find it along the entire southern half of Australia, so in this dark blue area, and even at the top of Tasmania here. And it's kind of healthy everywhere except in New South Wales. There are 6 estuaries where Posidonia is declining so fast that it's now being classified as endangered. So it was classified as an endangered species by the New South Wales government in 2011. And in 2015, it was classified as an endangered ecological community by the EPBC Act. So this means that unless we do something about it, these populations look like they're heading towards local extinction. Now, why? There's many reasons. The thing about seagrasses, like Posidonia, especially in New South Wales, they like to grow in places that are sheltered. And that means they're the same places where we like to build our houses, etc. So there's a lot of kind of conflict with humans. Some of the historical causes of decline are pollution, building of marinas and you know, dredging to develop the coastline, shading associated with, you know, sedimentation, nutrient structure. So all of these have contributed to the historical decline. But one of the factors that is leading to really fast decline at the moment is boat moorings. So here what you see, this is a photograph of Lake Macquarie. Everything that is dark is Posidonia. Everything that is light is basically the mooring scar. So these are swing moorings. There's a chain that drags along the seafloor, and it just basically scrapes everything that is underneath it. And as the wind and the tide change, the scar keeps getting bigger and bigger, and that can lead to really big areas and fragmentation of the meadow. So, for example, mooring scars as large as 700 meter squares have been recorded. And the thing about this mooring damage is that it happens really quickly. So this photograph, for example, shows how from the beginning of a mooring in April 2012, very quickly, in just a few months, you can start seeing very sizable scars that just keep growing and growing and growing and growing. So in just 2 years, you have a massive scar. And then when you have lots of scars together, they start to merge, and that's kind of the beginning of the end. So mooring damage happens very quickly, And Posidonia grows very slowly. So one of the things about Posidonia is that it's one of the species that grows most slowly in the whole of Australia. And because it grows so slowly and the impacts are still happening, that's what's leading to experts to think that these species may become locally extinct within 15 years in some estuaries. So what's our proposed solution? The first thing with any restoration is, the first thing you need to do is fix the cause of the decline. So if seagrasses are declining because of swing moorings with this chain that scrapes the bottom, you need to fix that problem. And what we're suggesting here is using environmentally friendly moorings. And we are by no means the first people to suggest that. There's been environmentally friendly mooring designs available for a few decades now. Some work extremely well, and they're all over the world now. So what the key thing with an environmentally friendly design is that there's no heavy chain that drags along the seafloor. So this is either a neutrally buoyant material, maybe it's rubber, maybe it's a synthetic material that is elastic, but it just doesn't drag along the seafloor. Now the thing about it is, though, that even say if we switch all the swing moorings and put environmentally friendly moorings in the whole of New South Wales, because Posidonia grows so slowly, it's likely that the species will disappear before we see the recovery. And that's why we need to combine these environmentally friendly moorings with restoration. Now, the thing about Posidonia that is also a bit problematic is that because it's endangered and protected and there's not many healthy meadows left, finding the donor material for the restoration is actually a challenge. You know, with Crayweed, we can literally just go north of Palm Beach, and there's so many healthy populations, we can just take it from there, take them to Sydney, and those populations will recover in a few years. Posidonia takes a lot longer to recover, so we can't just take it from a healthy meadow and then damage that. So this is how we came up with a new concept called the Operation Posidonia Storm Squad, where basically what we're doing is recruiting volunteers to collect Posidonia shoots that become naturally detached after big storms. So basically, when they first become detached, and this is inevitable with storm, it's a natural process, when they're still green, they're still alive, so they can actually be rescued, if you like, and used for restoration. So people collect them from the beach, then they take them to a shoot collection station, and I shall say that this project is being done in Port Stephens at the moment. So we want to now move from Port Stephens to other estuaries, but the proof of concept, everything we've done to date has been in Port Stephens. So this is a marina called the Anchorage Marina, where we have a station where people collect the shoots. They can bring them to little plastic boxes that we have here in this chest, and then people just zip them down so that the shoots are stored on the water until a technician from fisheries, New South Wales Fisheries, our collaborations, comes in and brings these rescued seagrass shoots from the beach into these tanks, where they're kept until there's enough of them to do the restoration. So kind of in a similar way to Operation Crayweed, we also created a website and a Facebook presence, but with Operation Posidonia, the community engagement is actually essential, because without people helping us to restore shoots, we couldn't do the restoration. Like, we don't have enough money to have somebody looking out and going to the beach and collecting shoots all the time. So we really depend on people giving their time, and these are people that go for a walk in the morning along the beach, walking the dog, they collect the seagrass, put it in this kind of system in the Anchorage Marina, and then we use it for the restoration. Without them, we couldn't do it. So the community engagement, very important. We have social media presence. We also have done a whole lot of school visits to try and get, obviously, the new generations involved. And then we've also done things like kind of guided walks, and the whole thing has been incredibly successful. So in the first 1.5 years, volunteers collected over 1,500 Posidonia australis shoots. This is kind of what they look like with the rhizome at the bottom. So it's been a really kind of encouraging project to work on. So this work is being done by PhD student Julia Ferretto. She's been the driving force behind all the restoration, and this shows all the different plots that have been planted so far. So there's been 10 mooring scars restored so far in 2019, and then some of them, the ones in red, no, the ones in blue, anyway, some of them actually have environmentally friendly moorings. The other ones were old scars where the mooring has been removed. And this is what it looks like. So we are testing a few different things. Julia's doing a whole lot of science about what traits of the seagrass best predict shoot survival. But other things that we're looking at in a kind of scientific way is how different methods facilitate survival. So in one of the treatments, we have these jute mats that we were thinking would help stabilize the sediment and may lead to greater survival versus other treatments where there's no jute mat at all. And this is just some preliminary data from 2 time points, 4 different scars, and basically this is the survival. And this for seagrasses is really good. So we're getting, we're getting more survival when we plant in the winter than in the summer so far. And in the winter, we're getting good survival of somewhere between 70% and upwards, which is great. And the different colors here are with and without jute mats. And essentially what we see is that when they have an impact, it's a positive one. So with jute, more survival than without. But often there's actually no difference. So far what we have found with this project is that, yes, basically we didn't know whether this method of using Posidonia that has been detached and found on the beach, whether these would be actually viable sources for restoration. And we found that, yes, it is. So the transplant stress of, collecting it and replanting it, all of this, the plant can deal with this. So these storm detached shoots are a viable source for restoration. We're getting up to 70% survival rate when planted in the winter. We've also started to see that the fragments start producing completely new shoots in less than a year, which is essentially because that's obviously what's going to be the beginning of the full meadow. So I just thought that to finish up, I'll show you a little video of us in action. So this is the last restoration that we did. It was in November last year, before the fires, before COVID, different time. And here's so part of the team. So here's Derek and Maddie, and this is Julia. This is myself. And so this is what an EFM looks like. So you see, instead of the chain, there's this kind of rubber system that doesn't drag on the seafloor. This is one of the jute mat treatments, and then we had some without jute mats here. We only put these poles on the side to mark the plots, while we're doing the measurements. But of course, all of this will be removed after the restoration. And Julia is actually marking every single shoot with a number so that she can trace what traits of the seagrass lead to more survival. And that's what, a new restored Posidonia meadow looks like. So to finish up, I'll just acknowledge the many people that work in this project. So this project is a collaboration between Sydney Institute of Marine Science and UNSW Sydney, and the New South Wales Departments of Primary Industry, and some colleagues from the University of Western Australia. So they've been doing restoration for a long time. So we partner up with them to actually increase the chances of this working and taking off. So from UNSW, we have Alistair Poore and Julia Ferretto. From SIMS, we have Maddie Langley and Derek Cruz, and PhD student Lana Kashlik. Some of these guys obviously work in both Crayweed and Posidonia. From Fisheries, we have Tim Glasby and Graham Housfield. And from UWA, we have Elizabeth Sinclair, Gary Kendrick, and John Staton. And last but not least, I just wanted to flag that some of the Crayweed restoration work is being featured in this TV documentary series, Australia's Ocean Odyssey. It's on tonight at 8:30. And in the episode tonight, there's actually a fragment that talks about kelp forests and climate change, as well as talking about marine parks. It's a really, really exciting kind of episode. But next week, there's a sequence on Crayweed restoration that I was lucky enough to see, and it's a really powerful kind of sequence because it shows some of the protests of people in the 80s that were complaining about the sewage problem before it got fixed. So it really kind of brings it home, the fact that we've managed to fix this problem that was so huge back in the day. And with that, I'll stop sharing and I'll thank you all for listening.
We do have one question from the last segment that I did miss at the time. Have you had any feedback from policymakers that they have seen the value of marine restoration for the all-important business of carbon sequestering?
There's definitely a lot of interest in this, and we are just about now starting to work at quantifying it. So both seaweeds and seagrasses, we think, play a role in carbon sequestration, but especially seagrasses, because seagrasses are habitats where things sediment and the carbon effectively gets sequestered locally. So once the carbon accumulates, once it's below, a certain depth in the sediment, it gets mineralized and it doesn't kind of get respired out, so it doesn't exit, so that's why it's sequestered. We haven't yet done any quantification of carbon sequestration in the restored Posidonia, but other people have, and we're interested in actually starting to look at the numbers here because there's increasing interest in trying, in businesses and private kind of individuals wanting to offset the carbon that we emit. So this could be a really good way to do it. And, it doesn't get affected by fires. So there's a lot going for it. And that's with the seagrasses. With the crayweed or kelp more generally, because it's so productive and there's so much biomass produced, we think that's also an important carbon sink, because even though that carbon doesn't get sequestered locally, because it doesn't build on, it doesn't get sequestered on the rock, a high proportion of this carbon gets exported to the deep sea, and once it goes below 1,000, 2,000 meters, it gets effectively kind of sequestered out of the system for a few thousand years. So this is really kind of cutting edge science that scientists are working on right now.
Awesome. We do have a question here about specific to Wallace Lake, which is of course in Foster Tuncurry, about the dominant seagrasses.
So in Wallace Lake, there is a lot of Posidonia. It's the range edge of Posidonia and beautiful meadows, but also Zostra would probably be the other dominant species. So Posidonia is like thicker, like 1 centimeter kind of thick or white, and Zostra is thinner. It's like 0.5 centimeter and sometimes longer, sometimes shorter. Both are very important. But because Posidonia grows more slowly and it has higher biomass for things like carbon sequestration, it's more important. Whereas Zostra is more important for nursery, for example, as a nursery for a lot of fish species.
I might just throw in there as well that as a council, we actually monitor our seagrasses, and we report on them each year in our report card document. So each year we produce a waterways and catchment report card. So if anybody's interested in that, they can actually find that on our website. If you just go to the main page and then search report card, it also reports on water quality. So if anybody's interested, you can find that there. I'll throw it back to you, Adriana, and we do have another question here, which is quite an interesting one. I live on the northern side of Port Stephens and often see Posidonia shoots washed up on Jimmy's Beach after storms. If I was to collect them, how would I store them before taking them to the anchorage?
That's wonderful, thank you. We actually used to have a place to store them in the northern side, but with one of the big storms, the chest got damaged. But if there was a lot of interest, we could consider, setting up a system again up in the north. But the best way to transport them is actually putting them in a plastic bag, so not in water. So what we want is to maintain the seagrass moist. So either a wet cloth would be ideal, a cloth that is like soaked in seawater and then wrapped in a plastic bag, for example. That's the best way to transport it. And in this way, if it's a hot day, put it in an esky in a cool esky, not with fresh water, but yeah, that's the best. That's the best way. That's much better than, say, putting it in a bucket with water. That tends to lead to it kind of starting to decompose really fast.
Okay, if there's no more questions, I haven't got any more listed here. So I just want to say a huge thank you to Adriana for presenting to us tonight. That's some really interesting stuff. I've got a few messages here that all say thank you. These are really heartening projects. You're doing great work. So I think it's great to hear about it and to see what we're doing. So thank you.
It's been a pleasure. And yeah, my email, or we're on Facebook, any messages that you want to direct to us, either through Facebook or my email is online, easy to see, easy to find. I'd be very happy to answer any other questions.
Well, I want to say thank you to you all for attending as well. I know it's late in the evening, but I hope you all enjoyed yourselves. This event tonight is part of our Marine and Catchment Discovery series. So it's a series that we run as Mid Coast Council in conjunction with Hunter Local Land Services.